Good afternoon. Chancellor Motley, Provost Langley, distinguished faculty, dedicated staff, accomplished students and graduates, friends and supporters. Welcome to our 8th annual celebration of research, innovation, scholarship, and creativity. First of all, I would like to thank the staff in the Office of Research and Graduate Studies for their excellent work on putting this event together, particularly Jim Mortensen, Inette Cameron, and Shimitra Owens for coordinating all the functions. I also want to thank John Jessel and his team for their outstanding technical support, Harry Brett for creating wonderful memories for us, and the staff at Sodexo for their great catering service. Thank you. We have had another exciting and highly successful year. Last Thursday, we celebrated the publications of more than 40 books by our faculty in the academic year 2013-2014. We have set new records in graduate enrollment for 3 semesters in a row, topping 4,000 for the first time in fall 2014. Despite of a very difficult external funding environment and the declining trend of many top research universities, we have managed to achieve modest and steady increase in our external grants and contracts, setting a new record of over $60 million in 13-14, an increase of over 42% since 2009, an impressive 810% increase during the last 25 years. Congratulations. This has also been a year with the highest number of prestigious awards received by our university, faculty, graduates, and students. The Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities has recently selected UMass Boston for its 2nd annual Innovation and Economic Prosperity University Award, recognizing our exceptional contributions in creating a diverse STEM workforce, exemplified by the work of the National Center of Excellence in Computing and Information Technologies under the direction of Deborah Boivier. Deborah, with apologies, you never told me how to pronounce your last name. So, among the most prestigious individual awards include the Medora Prize in Biodiversity, awarded to distinguished Professor Kamal Bawa by the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and the Aeon Environmental Foundation of Japan. The Nurse Faculty Scholar Award from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, received by Professor Emily Jones in our College of Nursing and Health Sciences. The National Science Foundation Career Awards to Assistant Professor Jennifer Bowen and Professor Liam Revel, both in biology. Congratulations. The 2014 Langley Literary Fellowship in Poetry awarded to Professor Joe McDonough. And the 2014 Rona Jeffrey Foundation Writers Award given to one of our most distinguished alums of our MFA program in creative writing, Daniel Jones Pruitt. A 3-year NASA Harriet Jenkins Predoctoral Fellowship awarded to Edward Sands in the School for the Environment under the supervision of Professor Crystal Schaff. A 3-year Ford Foundation Predoctoral Fellowship awarded to Ashley Boseko Kim in the School for the Environment, supervised by Professor and Dean Robin Hannigan and Professor Ron Adder in biology. A 2-year predoctoral fellowship from the American Heart Association awarded to Jacob Karaoke of nursing under the supervision of Professor Eileen Stewart Shaw. A 2-year Dennis Weatherstone Predoctoral Fellowship from Autism Speaks awarded to Melissa May in clinical psychology under the supervision of Professor Alice Carter in psychology and Professor Angela Stone McDonald in curriculum and instruction. The Outstanding Paper Award for Young Scientists from the Committee on Space Research of the International Council for Science, received by a doctoral student, Joseph Cohen, in computer science, supervised by Professor Wei Ding. And a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship awarded to our 2014 commencement speaker, JFK Award recipient Sean O'Grady of psychology for pursuing his PhD study at UC Berkeley. Indeed, the list goes on and on. Indeed, we have much to celebrate and to be thankful. To get us into the proper spirit of celebration and to express our enormous gratitude to you for your exceptional commitment to our global mission of ensuring access to excellence in higher education and creating a distinguished public urban research university in the world capital of excellent higher education. It is now my distinctive honor to bring our inspirational Chancellor J. Keith Motley to the podium to give his remarks.
Someone pointed to the podium and told me that it was this way. I have just come from getting my eyes dilated, and they told me that I would not be able to see. And I said, not me, not Keith. That can't happen to me. And Steve has been dragging me around campus trying to get me here. I would not have missed this event for anything in the world other than having an eye infection that I didn't want to give to you. I am not contaminated now. I'm okay. The eye has been dilated. I can't see, but good afternoon and thank you. I heard John Guo say that there's over 40 books that have been published since the last time we got together. He talked about all of the wonderful things you have done to give me to brag about all over this country, to talk about our research, to talk about all that you've done and the grants that we've been able to work together to get here at this institution is amazing. Thank you all for joining us today. It's our 8th annual luncheon is something that you should be proud of. Thanks all of our faculty. I understand there are about 8 other people that you're going to hear from after I'm done. And I noticed that next to mine, I did read that, it said brief. It also said brief next to the provost. And then it said, for the rest of you, do what it is that you're going to do today. Each year, we have a wonderful opportunity to sort of talk about our successes, and they become more and more impressive. We just had a board meeting 2 days ago, or yesterday, it seems like 2 days ago. It was in Amherst. And we were able to brag about all the impressive work that you've done. Thank you for arming me all of the time with that opportunity. Early this week, I saw so many of you as our distinguished faculty members spoke at their lecture for the Chancellor's Award winners from last year's commencement. I was reminded of how interconnected these aspects of our university are. When we talk about teaching, scholarship, and service, that interconnection here is something that I'm very, very, very proud of. Thank you for that. It is because of our innovation and also our creative approaches to teaching that we can successfully compete for instructional grants, faculty fellowships, public service contracts, and other basics, as well as translational research grants. You are showing up in every arena. You have made all of us proud. We're so grateful for that. Our teaching, our research, our scholarship, our service, our innovative ideas, our creative pursuits are now and forever intertwined, and that is because of you. We don't have to force it. You've been doing it. They are the basis upon which we are fast gaining recognition all over this country as the nation's top urban public research university, and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you to each and every one of you, inside of and outside of the classroom, that took the time to be here today to celebrate you and to celebrate all of these successes. Now I want to recognize a few people. Marty quit for delivering today's keynote address. Marty, for those of you who don't know, is a recently retired professor of history. Great to see you. I know you're right out there somewhere. I got you. Who embodies the very best of what it means to be a member of this great university, the University of Massachusetts Boston community. In his capacity as a faculty member, an academic administrator, a mentor of students and faculty and others, and now a leading contributor to sharing what we do to the people of Massachusetts and beyond is something we're so grateful to you for. Thank you for that. I also want to recognize R. Turner Goins, who I had a chance to say hello to at my table over here earlier. She is a nationally known specialist in issues related to American Indian aging. She is Western Carolina University's first ambassador, Jeanette Hyde, Distinguished Professor of Gerontology, how do I say that? Okay, whatever you just said. Social work and program director for the Geezer Gallery at the Council on Aging of Buncombe County, okay. Now, Professor Goins, we love all that, but what we love most is that you're back home today, and that you're from here, and you're out here representing us all over this country and all over this world. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for wearing that University of Massachusetts development very well. We appreciate that. She's an alumna of East Carolina University as well, so we'll give them a little credit too, all right? But being part of this wonderful institution has helped shape her with her Master of Science and her PhD degrees in gerontology from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Welcome home. Vice Provost J, thank you. Thank you for always reminding us of all that we are doing every year. Director of Communications for Research and Graduate Studies, Jim Mortensen, thank you for the work in putting this luncheon together. All those that are serving us today, thank you for that work. You make it a special place here for us as well. I'm grateful that you support our cultural recognition and also our acknowledgement for our student, faculty, and staff researchers. Thank you for acknowledging them. So today, we say thank you for all that you do for our students, our community, and the people of the Commonwealth and beyond. Thank you. Your work is so important. You are so important. Have a wonderful and joyous holiday season. I can't wait to get ready to move into the next year and get ready for commencement, and then on and on and on and on together with you. So thank you so much. Dean Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. I believe you are all aware our significant progress and impressive accomplishments in recent years would simply not be possible without the inspirational vision and strong leadership of our next speaker. Yes, his ambitious dreams for our students, for UMass Boston, and for the world often present a series of challenges to our traditional ways of thinking and doing things, and make us quite uncomfortable at times, myself included. He has made a lifetime commitment to this great institution. He's an extremely knowledgeable scholar, you all know, and the hardest working person that I have personally known. He inspires, challenges me every single day, literally. Here is our Provost and Chief Academic Officer, Winston Langley.
Thank you, Jean-Guy, and despite your exaggerations. Chancellor, we know that you have ways of seeing. All right. Thank you, Vice Provost and Dean of Graduate Studies for your team for today's gathering and celebration. Thanks to each of the groups to which the Chancellor referred. I too want to say a special thanks to you. I think today might be thought of in terms of human enlargement. An enlargement which stems from a progressive assault on the confinements, intellectual, physical, social, ethical, aesthetic, etc., within which human beings have found themselves and within which they have evolved. Research has something to do with the removal of these confinements. And indeed, any intellectual history of the human endeavor would reveal that. It does not come from any fixed quarters within the United States. It is part of the broad religious experiences of our forebears and even our contemporaries. I don't know whether you have noted the death of Alexander Grothendieck just a few weeks ago, who sought to unite algebra and arithmetic and geometry and topology in which he spent an inordinate amount of time reflecting on the Buddhist focus not on discrete objects, but on the relationships between and amongst objects, as part of his inspiration. The work of the transcendentalists within the United States, if you wish, and their reflections on what they understood to be Eastern ways of thinking. The Greeks and the Egyptians and what emerged out of the Arab, Judaic, or Jewish intellectual traditions before we dismantled what we have come to call the Middle Ages in our thinking in the West. We are indebted to the universe as a whole. And it fits into the assumption that the universe itself is a cosmos that has a certain order and some disorder to it, to which the human intellect has a kinship, and that our careful examination of the relationship between ourselves, the societies we construct, the alliances, the betrayals, the loyalties, the internal rehearsals of the possible scenarios when we meet each other and how we must approach each other are all part of a wonder for science. And that this university is deeply engaged, as the Chancellor just indicated, in all of these phases. Please know that whatever it is that is said about our hard work, it is because we know of the hard work that you do in service, in teaching, in research, in engagement, and that we see ourselves as being part of a common effort in the development of this university that, as it espouses the principles of access and inclusion, it also is satisfied with an understanding that nothing but the best will be defining of us and our individual and collective future. Thank you for being here. I'm proud of being a part of this engagement.
Thank you, Provost Langley. This year is a very special year. Our Center of Science and Mathematics in Context, directed by distinguished Professor Arthur Eisencraft, is celebrating its 10 years of transformative work. With almost $37 million of external grants and a dream team from across the campus, including Professor Bob Chen in the School for the Environment, Professor Hannah Servian in chemistry, Brian White in biology, Lisa Gonzalez and Kristen Wendell in curriculum and instruction, and many others, as well as the local public school systems in Massachusetts and elsewhere, and developed wonderful models for science education for the entire country and the world. Along with the efforts of many other productive faculty and research staff, the research and development expenditure in education at UMass Boston was ranked 6th in the country. It is an extraordinary accomplishment, a wonderful reflection of our teaching soul. Congratulations. This year, we're also celebrating our 50 years of great accomplishments in research and graduate studies. I believe we have found a perfect person for helping us interpret the inspirational vision of our founders for UMass Boston, reflect on how we have got here, and envision the endless possibilities for the future of our beloved institution. He's a highly respected historian, the current chair of our retired faculty council, the former vice provost for research and dean of graduate studies of UMass Boston for 5 years, and the chair of the faculty council for 2 terms. If you think about it, it is me a few years before, probably a few years later, I aspire to be. Here is Professor Emeritus History, Marty Quay.
As I listened to Vice Provost Ja enumerate the individual scholarship and research achievements of the past year, I stand here very humbled and grateful. It's extraordinary where we are today. And so one of the advantages of being old is in many ways I've seen firsthand our entire 50-year history. So let me talk about my view of where we've been, where we are today. I won't say much about the future. I'm a historian who's written about the unpredictability of the past. Am I too loud? Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, I never use one of these. I usually, but the rooms are much smaller when I talk. Anyway, and I have no visual aids. Ooh, I probably should. Let me focus on 2 dimensions of our history: our internal development and our distinctive urban setting and the interplay between the two. And I bring the perspective, and I think in part this is important, of a lifelong Massachusetts resident, a native of Boston who has spent the last 46 years affiliated with 2 institutions, Boston State College, and for the last 32 years, the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Cities have been the crucible of change in American history, and the civil rights movement of the 1960s exemplified that in an important way. I've been reminded of that in recent weeks with the demonstrations in Boston and in cities across the country because of the grand jury decisions just outside St. Louis and in New York City. Whether these turn into, become more than momentary episodes and become a movement with lasting results is yet to be determined. Well, in the 1960s, one major consequence of the civil rights movement was to focus attention on the conditions of the urban poor. And to use Provost Langley's term, I think what reformers wanted to do was to enlarge the opportunities, the possibilities for the life of people living in the cities, particularly with regard to educational opportunity. And the consequence of that was the formation of new public urban universities, and in several cases, satellite campuses of existing institutions became separated and became public urban universities. Although they shared a common resolve to serve the urban populations, these institutions were all at different stages of development. UMass Boston began essentially as an undergraduate college. many of the founding faculty believe that providing an undergraduate liberal arts education, quote, equal to the best, end quote, of the best private colleges in the state would fulfill our campus mission. And their vision predominated. Some pushed for graduate education, and in the 1970s, a few master's programs in the liberal arts were established. There was also some movement towards what is called applied research. Indeed, I remember very well my first year here in 1982, a panel with two eminent faculty members discussing the future of research at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. One expressed his reservations, his concern that a focus upon research and scholarship might come at the expense of teaching, the central mission of the campus. The other outlined what he thought was the most appropriate kind of research that should take place at UMass Boston, applied research which took up pressing urban issues. Reflective of those views, in 1980, there was a total of about 6,000 students on campus, and fewer than 100 of them were in graduate programs. 2 years later, in 1982, began our first doctoral program in environmental science. And also in 1982 came the merger with Boston State College. And the leadership on campus made a very shrewd strategic decision that year to bring over in their entirety programs that did not duplicate what was already offered on this campus. A result of that was that overnight, UMass Boston became a player in graduate education. We had quite a number of master's programs, mainly in professional areas that came over from Boston State, in nursing, education, counseling. Now, although there was growing recognition in that decade, in the 80s, that the Commonwealth's economic development was tied to an educated workforce that stayed here, and that the technological innovations of the 1980s required people with post-baccalaureate training, each time we sought to expand our graduate offerings, especially at the doctoral level, we faced a major external challenge. Our proposals could not duplicate what competing private institutions in the area offered or what other UMass campuses offered. Two of our competitors in the private sector in the 1980s were Boston College and Northeastern. Both of those had been local institutions that drew almost entirely on urban students. Both became very ambitious in the 1980s and sought to transform themselves into major research universities that drew students nationally and internationally. If UMass Boston were to provide students with educational opportunity equal to the best, We too had to offer doctoral programs across a variety of fields. But we had to find our own niche. The Chancellor spoke about innovation and creativity. We had to be, and I suspect we still are, quite innovative and creative in the development of new doctoral programs. In addition to environmental science, when I left as graduate dean in 2000, we had a total of 8 doctoral programs in such areas as nursing, gerontology, public policy, leadership in urban schools, clinical psychology. There was also a major financial constraint on our development of doctoral programs. The directors of these programs were accustomed to relying almost exclusively on internal funding, which meant that doctoral students were supported with existing campus funds. Yet, few of our doctoral students taught, and the reason for that was twofold. First, the campus culture had preferred non-tenure track faculty with terminal degrees than graduate teaching assistants. Secondly, there were few undergraduate courses in the fields, in the programs that doctoral students were taking. Well, the problem here was that there was a continuous decline in state funding over the quarter century, 1987 to 2012. UMass Boston, as I'm sure some of you know, lost the highest percentage of state funding of any institution in our Carnegie classification category. We went from receiving 78% of our funding in 1987 from the state to less than a third in 2012. Therefore, external funding has become even more crucial for supporting doctoral students. My last year as Dean and Research Officer, we had less than $18 million in external funding, and Vice Provost J just noted that we had over $60 million last year, which I believe was something like 20% of our overall operational budget. In the 1990s, when I was a graduate dean, we worried every year lest we not make our minimum requirement of conferring 10 doctoral degrees in at least 3 different programs in order to retain our Carnegie classification. Last year, we conferred 71 doctoral degrees across a dozen programs. As Vice Provost J said, we have now 4,000 graduate students. That's 25% of our overall enrollment. 15% of them are doctoral students. Now in over 24 fields, 7 more graduate programs, and I think 4 of them were approved by the Board of Trustees and the Board of Higher Ed recently. So clearly we are recognized as a major public urban research university under the Carnegie scheme. Let me mention the Carnegie classification system. It's being moved in January to Indiana University, but what it's going to do, what they hope to do, is to actually bring in schools from around the world and internationalize it. But right now there are 3,122 four-year institutions in the United States. 3,122 four-year institutions. Only 207 of them, that's 6.5%, are designated as research universities with high or very high research activity. Only 5 public universities in New England are so designated. 3 are in the University of Massachusetts system: UMass Amherst, UMass Boston, UMass Lowell, and also the universities of Connecticut and Maine. That's it. 2 of the private universities that I've talked about, Boston College and Northeastern, are in our Carnegie category. A couple of weeks ago, the Retired Faculty Council got a tour of the Integrated Sciences complex, the new facility that hasn't quite opened yet, dedicated to collaborative research. As you might expect, some retirees looked at the facilities and dreamily wished that they could reactivate their professorships. It really is the architectural symbol of our establishment as a research university. As an aside, I said, the worst part of my being vice provost of research 15 years ago was space. People would constantly nag me for space, and I hated it. I said, isn't it wonderful that that problem has been solved? That's what I was told. It hasn't been. I believe that our rising profile as a research university and our location in this city have made an important contribution to what I have seen in my lifetime as a sea change in the public consciousness about public higher education. As you probably know, the great number of elite private colleges and universities in Massachusetts has always in the past made public institutions the last choice of students and their families. When I graduated high school in the 1950s, I went to even though we were poor, I went to a private university in Massachusetts. My 2 children, when they graduated high school in the 1990s, as a matter of their choice, went to UMass Amherst. In fact, my son's first choice was UMass Boston, but Mom and Dad wanted him to have a dormitory experience. What enhances the visibility of UMass Boston is that we are not only in a world-class city, but we are also in the state capital. None of our peer institutions is in the state capital. Only one of our aspirational peers is in the capital of their state. Georgia State is in Atlanta. As you probably know, most state capitals are in the center of their states. They're not the largest, the greatest cities in their state, port cities so often. The consequence of that is that what happens on this campus is unlikely to remain hidden from either state government or the important media. Both state government and local media tap the scholarly expertise of our faculty on a regular basis. A week or so ago, I read in the Globe of Morris Cunningham, who's here today, in political science, commenting on the Boston City Council and its planned use of subpoena power, which has long been dormant. Dean Ira Jackson chaired a commission to set compensation for the governor and the state, to make recommendations for compensation for the governor and legislative leaders. The report was released. I saw him on Greater Boston discussing the report. Paul Watanabe, I listened to him, or read or listen to him continuously on Boston media discussing state politics. Rachel Rubin in American Studies, her commentaries on popular culture, I listen to on public radio, and I've seen her on public television. Lloyd Schwartz's poetry and music criticism for years has been a staple on national public radio as well as in a newspaper in Boston. And so it goes. These people whom I name reflect my own interests and my shrinking memory. But it doesn't, naming them doesn't do justice to the outreach our people have in the city and the state. In such areas as research-informed rehabilitation services to the disabled, research-informed clinical, nursing, and psychological services, research-informed counseling and curriculum development in the schools, research-informed cleanup of the Boston Harbor, one of the great achievements on this campus. This is only a partial list of what I'm most familiar with over the years. A week ago, the Globe's lead editorial was addressed to Governor-elect Baker, urging him to recognize the primacy of public higher education to the future of the Massachusetts economy, because our graduates, unlike those of the private institutions in the state, stay here. As a historian, as I said before, I shy away from predictions. However, I can confidently say that not only is UMass Boston here to stay, but that research and scholarship will always be central to how we educate our students and how we will be known. Research and scholarship make what we offer to our students equal to the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Coy. As some of you know, our PhD program in gerontology was the third doctoral program for UMass Boston, and the second doctoral program in gerontology in the US. It is now one of the top programs in its field in the country. It has awarded more doctoral degrees than any of its peers. Its faculty, graduates, and students represent a very powerful force for shaping the future of the relatively young discipline. We're extremely grateful Professor Jeff Burr, Chair of Gerontology, has agreed to highlight some of their major accomplishments and introduce one of their most distinguished alums. Here is Professor Burr.
Good afternoon. I want to send greetings from my colleagues, the staff, and students of gerontology to each of you. Before I begin, I want to thank some very important people to the success of the Gerontology Institute and Department on this campus, and that includes Chancellor Motley, Provost Langley, Vice Provost J, and very importantly, Dean Ira Jackson, Dean of the McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies, who is helping to shepherd along our future. Before I introduce Turner Goins, I've been asked to say a few things broadly about gerontology on this campus. What many of you may or may not know is we have both this Gerontology Institute and a Gerontology Department. The Gerontology Institute and Department work hand in glove and have very similar missions. I want to introduce you to somebody who's very important to the future of gerontology on this campus, and that is the new director of the Gerontology Institute. His name is Len Fishman. He's hiding over there in the corner. Len is the former CEO of Hebrew Senior Life and the former commissioner for the Department of Health of the state of New Jersey. And he and I are working closely together to try to improve the fortunes of gerontology. On campus and off campus, we're very much community engaged, and we're very much into service in what we do in gerontology. We have something called the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute with 1,100 dues-paying members, age 55 and above, who are come to the university every day to take courses. This spring, there will be 70-some courses taught by UMass Boston faculty and UMass Boston graduate students. It's a very vibrant thing that we have going with the OLLI program. We also have something called the Pension Action Center, which was established by Ellen Bruce, who many of you know. She retired last June from the university. That center has now branched out beyond New England into Illinois and will be going further than that, and they have recovered almost $50 million in lost pensions for older people. We have a new Center for Social and Demographic Research on Aging that's less than 2 years old, and it has many mandates, but one of them is to do needs assessments for local towns and communities, and a dozen have already been done or are in progress, and one of those was done for the city of Boston, and a very strong relationship with the city is developing as a result of that needs assessment. With respect to our education mission, we have several gerontology programs on campus. There's an undergraduate gerontology program, and there's also 2 graduate programs. The Management of Aging Services Master's Program, which was established in 2003 with the help of then graduate Dean Emily McDermott, has over 250 graduates so far. And they are committed as a group to helping maintain healthy and independent lives of older people. We also have a PhD program, as you've heard. It's one of the first of its kind in the country. Its graduates work in many different venues, including for the federal and state government. An example is Jay Bulott, who is the Director of Aging Services for the state of Georgia, and he was previously the Director of Aging Services for the state of Louisiana. Our graduates work in non-academic settings like for Partners Healthcare, U.S. Administration on Aging, AARP, and so forth. Our graduates also are very deep into doing research in the scientific study of aging. And they're doing that at some of the most prestigious universities in the world, including at Yale University, Duke University, the University of Michigan, the University of Minnesota, the University of Southern California, the University of California at Los Angeles, the University of Texas Medical School, and so forth. So they're making a big impact. We recently went through an A-Quad review, which many of you know what that's about. About 2 years ago, we did a self-study. And we estimate from that self-study that our graduates have written in the peer-reviewed journal world, the non-peer-reviewed outlets, books and book chapters and so forth, more than 1,000 items. They have produced over $35 million in external funding for their institutions, and generally we are just extremely proud of them. You can see in the little booklets that were given to you some information about some of our other stellar graduates, but today it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Turner Goines, who is a 1997 graduate of our program. As you heard, she is Western Carolina University's first ambassador, Jeanette Hyde Distinguished Professor of Gerontological Social Work. She's also the new program director for the Geezer Gallery, and I leave it to her to unwind that for you. Her professional accomplishments are many, and she's going to walk you through a little bit of her professional life, so I'm not going to say too much more about her. She is the leading expert in gerontology on Native American elders. There is no question about that. She has, with her colleagues, generated over $7 million in external funding for her research. She's produced more than 60 peer-reviewed articles and dozens of books, monographs, and other reports. Please join me in welcoming Turner Goines.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to have been asked by Jeff to speak to you today. I'm flattered to have been asked to come up. I reside in North Carolina now, and I'd like to first thank Chancellor Keith Motley, Provost Winston Langley, Vice Provost for Research and Dean of Graduate Studies Zhang Gao, Dean Ira Jackson of the John W. McCormick School of Policy and Global Studies, and of course, Jeffrey Burr, Professor and Department Chair of Gerontology, which is housed in the School of Policy and Global Studies. This is a poster that I have framed, hanging in my office. So congratulations on your 50th anniversary. Life can bloom at 50. So this is an outline of my quick presentation, which I like to think of as my evolution of my career. This is my story of finding my passion and going for it. Once upon a time, I was 18 years old. I was not an honor student, nor did I do well on standardized tests. Fortunately, I managed to graduate high school with a C GPA. College was the expected next step for me. Fortunately, I got accepted into an in-state university, East Carolina University. Go Pirates. And I think the first major turning point in my career trajectory as to where I am now is the day that I packed the car to drive off to Greenville, North Carolina for college. My older brother told me that I was going to fail and I was going to flunk out. I'm the type of person that if you want me to do something, tell me I can't do it. So I took this as a challenge. A challenge first, obviously, to prove him wrong. And second, I had a need to prove to myself that I could excel academically if I actually made an effort. So when I was in college, I grew closer to my grandmother who lived nearby in eastern North Carolina. During this time, she had a negative experience with our healthcare system, which led me to pursue a minor in gerontology at East Carolina. As part of this minor, students were expected to complete a 6-credit-hour practicum. My practicum was with the Pamlico Sound Legal Services in New Bern, North Carolina, where I shadowed a paralegal. She took all the incoming calls from older adults in the region, and we would go to their homes and do an intake evaluation of their situation. This exposed me firsthand to rural, low-income African Americans in eastern North Carolina who experience inequities in health and access to health care. These experiences collectively ignited my passion to want to pursue a career in aging policy with a focus on low-income rural older adults. Fortunately, at the same time I came to this conclusion, I was excelling academically at East Carolina. So at this point, I knew I needed to go on to graduate school. Given my interest to make a difference with respect to aging policy, I knew the best way to be taken seriously was to have a PhD behind my name. And this certainly would be a way to prove my brother wrong as well. At the time, I was aware of the 2 PhD programs in the country. I only applied to UMass Boston. I didn't apply to the other one. This program was particularly appealing to me given its obvious focus in policy and its interdisciplinary curriculum. I was provisionally accepted into the program, not because of my GPA in college, but rather my GRE scores. Again, I took this provisional acceptance as a challenge. It did motivate me to make sure that I took things seriously. So I arrived here in Boston from eastern North Carolina in the fall of 1992. I was a member of the PhD program's 3rd cohort. In addition to my personal reasons for pursuing a career in gerontology, there are also more objective reasons why other persons should pursue a career in gerontology. So according to the U.S. Census, about 43 million persons in the U.S. are age 65 years and over, and this number is expected to almost double by 2050. This demographic tidal wave, if you will present significant challenges to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And the baby boomers, persons born between 1946 and 64, are primarily responsible for this demographic tidal wave, who began to turn 65 in 2011. After I got my dissertation proposal approved, I left for Washington, D.C. for an aging policy internship. A couple of years later, I flew back up to Boston, successfully defended my dissertation in 1997, and the same day I accepted a postdoctoral fellowship at Duke University Medical Center. After a year and a half in this postdoc, I applied and accepted a tenure-track position as assistant professor at West Virginia University School of Medicine in their Center on Aging. During this time, I became more and more interested to focus my research on American Indian aging issues, but I wasn't sure where to begin. Fortunately, I discovered a resource center for minority aging research center at the University of Colorado. They called it the Native Elder Research Center. It still exists today from NIH funding. This program is at University of Colorado, Denver. I participated in it for 2 years, starting in January 2000. The program purchased a third of my salary for 2 years to participate in their intensive career mentoring program. The program focused on teaching me how to succeed academically in a tenure-track position, as well as how to balance that in addition to doing research in Indian country. So many of you may have heard community-based participatory research. So doing research with American Indian tribes needs to embrace these principles. Basically, the idea of working with tribes is moving away from doing research on communities, but doing research with communities. And this approach to research really resonated with me. I've had the good fortune to be working with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, a federally recognized tribe in western North Carolina, for over 15 years. This tribe, like other federally recognized tribes, have a nation within a nation status and exercise their inherent sovereignty that goes along with it. So this tribe maintains its own distinct government with executive, legislative, and judicial powers. This tribe, to my knowledge, is the only tribe east of the Mississippi that maintains its own institutional review board. In fact, this tribe has 2 IRBs. It has an IRB that entertains health-related research, and it has an IRB that entertains culturally focused research proposals. The tribe exercises its inherent right to regulate research on its lands, which often surprises many academically based researchers who are accustomed to their academic freedoms. This slide shows the tribe's research needs as they've articulated it to me over the past 15 years. They want research proposals that are relevant and beneficial to the community. They want research requests that are culturally sensitive with processes that are culturally congruent. They want research proposals that don't demand extra time on their tribal staff. And if it does, make sure you've budgeted accordingly. They want researchers that are willing to work with and in the community. And lastly, they want to maintain ownership of any data generated from those studies. So in 2011, I left West Virginia University after 13 years for a position at Oregon State University. This allowed me the opportunity to be in a new region of the country and work with different tribes. While I was there, I learned of a nonprofit called the Geezer Gallery. This made me very excited because actually, secretively, for over a decade, I've been fantasizing about starting a nonprofit that married art and aging, but I never had the courage to pursue it. Quickly, this organization has two components. It has a therapeutic art program, a 10-week therapeutic art program that it provides for free for low-income older adults in downtown Portland. And also it has a high-end arts gallery in the Rose District that sells juried art made by persons aged 60 years and over. So soon after I arrived in Corvallis, Oregon, this endowed position that I occupy now became opened up. And after a lot of thought and consideration, I decided to apply. The beauty of this position that I'm in now, it allows me first to be back home. It allows me to be near the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, which are about 20 miles away from Cullowhee, North Carolina. It allows me to maintain my academic research, and also it allows me the freedom to pursue replication of the Geezer Gallery in Asheville, North Carolina. So in conclusion, the Geezer Gallery, as of September, is a new program within the Council on Aging of Buncombe County, and I am the program director. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bird, and thank you very much, Dr. Goins, for your moving and inspirational story. Now I think we're ready for another poetic moment. I would like to introduce to you two of our rising stars in a rapidly rising 7-year-young MFA program. A well-accomplished, award-winning junior faculty member, an award-winning alum of the program. It gives me great pleasure to present it to you, Professor Joe McDonough and Danielle Jones-Pruitt.
Well, I'm going to introduce Danielle, but first, I'm so proud of her. You're going to come over here, and I'm going to take your picture. Look, it's fancy. Oh, everybody's so happy for us.
Don't post that on Facebook.
I'm posting it on Facebook right away. So I'm going to introduce Danielle, and then Danielle is going to tell a story about me and read one of my poems, introduce me, and then I'm going to just talk a little bit about her and read one of her poems, and then you get to eat your lunch. We're so quick. Danielle Jones-Pruitt is from Anniston, Alabama, which you'll notice in a minute because she's got such a pretty voice, but it'll be relevant to her work in a second too. She holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and is program coordinator for the Writers' House at Merrimack College. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Best New Poets, Best, not second best, Best New Poets, Beloit Poetry Journal, Cider Press Review, Southern Poetry Review, and elsewhere. She is a recipient of a 2014 Rona Jaffe Writers Award, which I will also talk about more. Thank you. I'm going to stand up here with her.
I graduated from the MFA program with an MFA in poetry in 2012.
I want to put up the poems.
Oh, okay.
Then they don't look at us.
All right.
Yeah,
She was distracting me, sorry. So I'm Danielle Jones-Pruitt, and I graduated with an MFA in poetry in 2012. I'm very proud to have been part of that program, and I'm very proud to be here today to talk about Jill. I'm going to start by reading her official bio, and then I'm going to just tell you a little bit about how I met her. So Jill McDonough is the winner of the 2014 Lannan Literary Fellowship. And in case you don't know, that is huge, huge prize in the writing world, and 3 pushcart prizes. Jill's the author of Habeas Corpus, O. James, and Where You Live. The recipient of fellowships from National Endowment of the Arts, the Fine Arts Work Center, the New York Public Library, the Library of Congress, and Stanford's Steiner program. She taught incarcerated college students through Boston University's Prison Education program for 13 years. Her work has appeared in Poetry, Slate, The Nation, The Threepenny Review, and Best American Poetry. And I'm very proud to say she directs the MFA program at UMass Boston. I met Jill my very first semester in the MFA program. It was a 3-year program. I was coming from a background in behavioral and social science and had decided to leave all of my independent research, all of my work and GRE scores and everything behind to study poetry. So I was terrified. And a little crazy as well. I met Jill. She was adjunct faculty at the time. She was teaching here, Boston University, Harvard, and in the prison program. So she was pretty busy, but she had this kindness and generosity and this light about her that made me just automatically know that woman has so many things to teach me. And that was probably one of my smarter moments because she's taught me a lot. One of the biggest lessons, I think, that I learned from Jill was to say yes to opportunities that come your way. Everything that we would throw at her, she would say yes. Can you read this poem? Can you have an impromptu workshop with the MFA students, even though you're not paid to teach us? Can you do an interview for the student journal? Can you come hear this reading that we're doing? And it was yes, yes, yes. And it was always with love and with light. And it taught me that when opportunities come my way to say yes as well. And I'm still saying yes, so if you need help cleaning up after, I'm probably the person to ask. Jill also, with her work in the prison system, one of the things about her was that everything she did, she was teaching 7 courses at the time I met her. She should have been tired and cranky and angry, but no, everything was done with love. And I think that had a lot to do with her working in the prison systems with people who weren't free to do what they wanted. And so I think that Jill felt like if she was going to be lucky and alive to do what she wanted, that she was going to do it with love and with passion. And I learned that lesson from her. And also that plays into, I think, both of our work of giving voice to people who maybe can't speak for themselves. And one of the biggest lessons that informed my work came when I interviewed her for Breakwater Review, our student paper. And we were talking about her book at the time, which was Habeas Corpus, and it was a book of 50 sonnets written about executions that took place in America. And she said that people had asked her, why sonnets? The sonnet form, they're love poems. Why would you choose sonnets to talk about criminals being executed? And Jill said, a lot of the people who were executed didn't have memorials. Their names aren't part of the public record. I meant to do that. They are love poems. And what that taught me was that everything that we write should be what we love, and they're all love poems. And now I'm going to read you one of her poems. This is from her new manuscript, Reaper. And it appears in the Threepenny Review along with her grad professors, Robert Pinsky and David Ferry, and one other one?
It says David Ferry, Jill McDonough, Robert Pinsky, and others.
Oh.
That's great.
Okay. Reaper. It begins with a quote by Longfellow. "Oh, not in cruelty, not in wrath, the reaper came that day." Reaper. Just following orders, still death personified. The end of the world, and the reapers are angels. The Lord is my shepherd, my reaper. I shall not want. Reaper all-seeing, untired, unbored. The whip-smart Jesus in Matthew 13, he's parable crazy. He makes them up, breaks them down, gather together first the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them. Good seeds and bad, complicated harvest coming up. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear these metaphors, terrible parables, free for picking up off the ground around Trinity, the atomic test site, still hot, break, blow, burn. We breathed sand in, rained it down in Geiger dazzling beauty. A seafoam green surprise. American ingenuity, foresight, imagination. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away, even that which he hath.
Thank you, Danielle.
I'm gonna sit down.
You can sit down. I promised I'd stand up with her, but now she can sit down. Good job, Danielle. I'm going to tell a little bit of a story about what you do with a poetry degree. What do you do with a poetry degree? I get that a lot. A lot of people ask me that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of those things are. So Danielle's right. When we met, I was teaching 7 classes at a lot of different universities, and I was also applying for this job, and I really wanted this job. So one of the things I was doing when I was teaching her, one of the things you do when you have a poetry degree, is to help the graduate students organize their collections of poems that they're going to use. So they're going to turn that in as a thesis. So we would meet in this little room with a big table and spread the poems out. And we'd spread the poems out and we'd look at which ones should go next to which ones and how they change meaning depending on what order they're in. And Danielle just thought that was some kind of magic trick. I was like, no, it's not a magic trick. It's just what you do when you have a poetry degree. So we did this magic trick together, I don't know, like 9 times. So over and over we did this. And then she's done. She did it. She wrote a great thesis. She doesn't need to bother me anymore with this room and the table and the organizing the poems. And then I got this job. And the MFA students were really happy for me, that I wasn't just an adjunct anymore, that I was going to stick around, that I didn't always have to take off and go to a prison or go to Emerson, go to Boston University or go to Harvard. But Danielle came to my office and said, hey, can you one more time look at my thesis with me, lay out the poem? I was like, Danielle, Lloyd already signed off on it. Joyce already signed off. You're done. You did it. You did a great job. And she's like, please, just one more time. I was like, all right. So I went back in that room with her, with the table, and surprise, it wasn't a thesis time at all. She tricked me into going into that room so that the MFA students could throw me a surprise party because they were happy that I was going to stick around. So being sneaky is something that you do with a, thank you, with a poetry degree. Another party is at the Lotus Club, a fancy gentleman's club in New York City, like the secret rich person New York City. It was Mark Twain's Gentleman's Club. And that's where we got to go, where they announced that Danielle had won the $40,000 Rona Jaffe Prize, which is a lot of money. And that's one of the things you get to do when you have a poetry degree. We took selfies and drank champagne in the Lotus Club. This is nice, but the Lotus Club is nicer. And there's champagne. So well, keep it in mind. So it's not just drinking champagne. Sometimes it's answering the phone and finding out that strangers, have been watching you. And that these strangers have been watching you and they want you to stay doing exactly what you've been doing. The prizes that Danielle and I won this year, the Rona Jaffe Writers Award and the Lannan Literary Fellowship, those aren't things you apply for. Like usually, you apply for a grant or you apply for something and then they call you up and they say, you won. But this is just like you get a phone call and they say, we're gonna change your life with a lot of money because keep doing what you're doing. And that's what you get to do when you get a poetry degree. Danielle, you don't have to keep applauding. You can just applaud at the end. I'll be quick, I promise. I'm going to read a poem by her. So one of the things that you do with a poetry degree is that you write about something that means something to you. I already mentioned that Danielle is from Anniston, Alabama. I'm from Alexander, North Carolina, which is also in Buncombe County. These are places that mean something to us. It reminded me when the provost is talking about access and inclusion. The idea that these 2 girls from Alexander and Anniston could be hanging out in the Mark Twain Club drinking swilling, really, champagne. That's the kind of access and inclusion that I can really get behind, and that's what you get when you have a poetry degree. Danielle's current poems look at the chemical contamination around the Monsanto plant in Anniston, Alabama, where she grew up. So it's not all fun. That's something else that you get to do when you have a poetry degree. Another thing is that you get to read a fresh Danielle Jones Pruitt poem to very distinguished company, and then sit back down with Songwo and Winston and finish your dessert. So I'm going to read you the Danielle poem. Thank you very much for having us. Bringing back the dead. I knew something was wrong around here. I knew I was burying too many children. Sylvester Harris, undertaker. I would wash the rouge from your cheeks, uncake the base from your brow. I'd muss up your hair, unperfume your skin, let your fingernails grow long as you please. I'd untie your jaw, unglue your lips, no false smile, all your baby teeth showing. I'd uncap your eyes, newly round and roving. I'd strip the clay from your too thin torso, pump the blood back through your veins until the flush found your face. I'd lift you from the metal table, put you back in your twin bed by the window, warm, your mother's arms around you. I'd go home, climb the stairs to my room, forget myself in sleep. And when I woke to the shrill scream of the phone, instead of saying, no mother should have to bury her child, my wife would pat my back, say, only a bad dream. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe and Danielle. Award-winning faculty, mentoring award-winning students. It's a UMass Boston story. This is just one fantastic example. I'm going to bring another wonderful research team from the Department of Psychology. We have Professor Abby Eisenhower and her doctoral student, Francis Martinez Pedriza, to talk about how a collaborative effort between a student and her advisors, mentors, has blossomed to spur a $3.9 million research project supported by the National Institute of Mental Health.
Hello, I'm Abby Eisenhower, an assistant professor in the psychology department, and I'm here with Francis Martinez Pedraza, who is an advanced doctoral student in clinical psychology, who will introduce herself more in a moment. Not here with us, but very much here in spirit, is Alice Carter, who has a conference engagement that she had previously committed to, but what we would like to share with you today is a story of how a mentor-mentee collaboration and relationship and research collaboration can give rise to what is now a large-scale established federally funded program of research. In this case, Francis's dissertation, and her dissertation focuses on reducing health disparities in access to diagnosis and treatment for autism among young children and their families. And I think it's an example of the kind of research that is enabled by being part of a program, a department, and a university that values social justice and community outreach, as well as student engagement in research. So Francis is going to tell you a little bit more about the evolution of this project.
Hi, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity before we move forward and really thank the professors in the psychology department as well as the administration here at UMass Boston, where 6 years ago I decided to trade very warm winters in a Caribbean island in Puerto Rico, where I'm from, for very, very cold winters here. Just because, first of all, I had a huge interest in autism spectrum disorders, and one of the leading researchers in that field was here at UMass Boston. But also because I was really interested in working with families of children with autism who were Spanish speaking and who came from different cultural, racial, and ethnic backgrounds. And so I knew that UMass would be a great place for that because of its mission of outreaching to communities and serving communities. When I came here, I also started to get motivated to pursue this work because I started noticing that a lot of the research in this area did not include, the samples in all those studies that I was reading, did not include the kinds of kids that I wanted to be seeing. And also there were some studies saying that actually these kids that I was wondering where they were being diagnosed late, which meant that they didn't have access to early services that could really improve their developmental outcomes. And then at a clinical level, also working in the community as part of my practicum experiences for the clinical psychology program here, I started noticing that kids who were poor, who were English language learners, and other and historically under-resourced were less likely to be identified and get services early. So that's how we got to apply for a Weatherstone Fellowship. And in this 2-year fellowship, supported by Dr. Carter, who has been my mentor here, we proposed to disseminate autism early screening tools in early intervention programs here in Boston, and we partner with 3 early interventions that had the highest percentage of Spanish-speaking families being served in Boston. That's how we chose the program. Then we also started meeting with these programs to try to not only help them learn more about these tools, but also try to identify other types of barriers that would really influence screening the populations that we wanted to screen. And again, because I'm Spanish speaking and I come from Puerto Rico, I was really, really interested in putting my language and linguistic abilities to the service of Spanish speaking families and Latino families. So this is sort of what we did. If you see there, we basically went into programs and we proposed this screening and early intervention where early intervention providers got trained. We have trained so far over 120 providers across 3 sites. And they got trained on using standardized early screening tools that parents fill out some questions, and based on what the parents report, we can tell whether there should be some concern. But also we train providers on identifying early signs so that they can actually refer kids if they are feeling that there's some concern. We also train another set of providers, just a smaller group of providers at each site, to conduct the second level of screening, which is an observational screener. And so after that, basically a provider goes to a home and does a very brief 20-minute screening measure. And if there is concern again, then we made diagnostic services available here at UMass so that families would be referred here and would be able to get faster autism diagnostic assessment through our research program. So that's the 3rd level. When we proposed this, we didn't know it was going to get so big. And so it has definitely led to other research studies that Dr. Eisenhower will talk to you more about.
So with Francis's Weatherstone-funded dissertation as a foundation, we have been able to capitalize on that to show through the data that this screening process is not only feasible but effective in identifying kids who might not otherwise get picked up as having autism, and in doing so at a younger age, therefore enabling them to get treatment sooner. And with that data, we were able to get Health Resources and Services Administration grant from the Maternal and Child Health Bureau, as depicted on this slide here, to expand and continue serving even more children with the screening and assessment process that we had set into place. This grant brings in new collaborators, a new collaborator, Angel Fedig, who's a professor in the Early Education and Care and Inclusive Settings here on campus program, and again focuses on addressing health disparities among young children who are at risk for late diagnosis of autism. And with this approach, we focused on the Circle of Promise, which is a geographic zone in Boston designated by the mayor as having high levels of social risk factors, including poverty, low average levels of education, and high numbers of students who qualify as free or reduced price lunch as a marker of income. And we're continuing to partner with multiple early intervention agencies serving children 0 to 3, and we also have support from Boston Public Schools and the mayor's office. So this grant has 3 goals. The first goal is the same as with Francis's dissertation grant, which is to see if our screening and assessment process, applied universally and in a multi-stage and state-of-the-art fashion, can reduce some of those disparities by identifying more children and at younger ages and who have autism spectrum disorder. Secondly, we want to see if that's actually carrying over to better treatment. So once we've identified more children, we ask, through interviews with parents after the diagnosis, are your children actually receiving autism-specific treatment? How intensely, how frequently, and how satisfied are you with that? So that we can see if that reduced disparity in diagnosis is carrying over to a reduced disparity in treatment. And the third piece is around intervention, and that's influenced by another grant that we have ongoing across our team, depicted down here, which is the Smooth Sailing Study, an Institute of Education Sciences funded grant looking at the transition to early school for children with autism. And based on what we're learning from that grant, we're designing an intervention to support parents as they transition to the public school system for their child with autism, so that they are empowered to advocate for their child's special education needs and also to communicate effectively with teachers and special education providers, something that we know is an area of need for families. As an extension of that, this grant has led us to even more avenues of collaboration. So because of the HRSA grant and the Weatherstone Fellowship that Francis received, we now have a grant from the National Institutes of Mental Health to bring in more collaborators and more perspectives on this issue through a 5-year, $3.9 million grant. The key pieces of that are to bring in different disciplines to help us understand this process and to incorporate the involvement of pediatricians. So let me focus on who our collaborators are that we've brought into the mix. So one of the 2 PIs is Radley Chris Sheldrick from Tufts, and he brings a perspective of healthcare systems engineering, as does Jim Benny, and also pictured here, so that we can take a dynamic systems modeling perspective to figure out where the barriers and bottlenecks and delays in getting kids through the referral and diagnostic and treatment access process. We also are working with developmental pediatricians to bring in the perspective of how pediatricians can help streamline this process, and a qualitative approach using ethnography and participant observation to see on the ground what is the experience of parents whose children are going through the diagnostic and treatment process. So that's the NIMH grant. And Francis is going to talk about a couple of branching grants that have also been enabled or partnered with these grants.
Yes. So one of the things that we started noticing when kids were coming here to UMass was that many of them, besides having an autism spectrum disorder, they sometimes also had some behavioral challenges that parents were really struggling to deal with day to day. And so we're really happy that part of our team includes Dr. Angel Fedig from our institution, because she has started working with some of these parents, being supported by a Healy grant, and she basically goes to parents' houses and teaches parents skills to address these challenging behaviors, which has been shown to be really helpful to improve the kids' relationship with their parents. And we are really glad definitely to have her in our team, and parents also are really happy about having this resource. In addition to that, we have a collaboration with Dr. Shusha Kaldi and Dr. Eric Blazer. from the Developmental and Brain Sciences Department, as well as they also collaborate with two researchers at MIT, Dr. Ken Wisher and Dr. Fisher. And basically what they're doing is that they are studying early attentional processes in kids with autism spectrum disorder and seeing how they do compare to other children their same age. And this is really important because there's not a lot of people out there trying to understand these processes very early on. So these same kids that are coming here for diagnostic evaluations, many of them are participating from these research studies, and we hope that the information that we get from these studies can really help kids in the long run as well.
So as a result of this large-scale research program, Francis's initial dissertation has led to some, I think, some pretty remarkable and heartwarming results. So almost 600 children have now been screened for autism as part of this study, and 111 have received the second stage screening. And the screener seems to be working pretty well. So what it means is that of the 83 children that we have seen for a full diagnostic assessment, 75 of those have gone on to receive a diagnosis of autism through our comprehensive diagnostic assessment. And those are potentially 75 children who might not otherwise have received a diagnosis in this rapid and efficient manner. And it does seem that we are targeting the groups that are at risk for delayed diagnosis. So 35% of them are non-native English speakers, and roughly 95% come from low-income households and identify as children of color. So this leads us to be optimistic about the future of this program and to potentially disseminate it across other agencies across the state and nation. I just want to point out a couple of other members of our team that we've also been able to bring on board. Our clinicians, Carrie Murphy and Erica North, are bringing clinical expertise to the assessment, and we've observed that this is a really mutually beneficial process for graduate students and the team. So not only are these students giving us their time and expertise in evaluating young toddlers with challenging behaviors and symptoms and working with their very stressed parents during a really challenging time for parents, but they are also gaining valuable training in the diagnostic process. And our research coordinators and research assistants, the majority of whom are UMass Boston undergrads or recent graduates, are showing us that UMass Boston leaves them very well prepared with excellent research skills to contribute in a really valuable manner to our team. So we want to thank you for your time and letting us tell you a little bit about the process we've had. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby and Francis. We do not have adequate time for our next speaker. She's a relatively newcomer to UMass Boston, but she joined us 3 years ago. She has established herself as one of the most dedicated and caring mentors and most productive research scholars. She is serving on the science team for 2 of NASA's programs. One of her doctoral students at UMass Boston has already graduated working at the USDA Center for Remote Sensing. She is now supporting 5 doctoral students at UMass Boston, 2 doctoral students at BU with her external grants. She was recently invited to serve as a co-editor of one of top 3 journals in remote sensing, along with another recent hire, Professor Zhongpeng Li, in the same school. The 2 superstars has made the UMass Boston stand out in the field of remote sensing. Here is Professor Crystal Chef.
Well, thanks everybody for sticking it out. So I will be brief. It's been a pleasure to come to UMass over the last 3 years, and particularly to be part of the start for the School for the Environment. My background is that this is my third career. My first career was doing weather and remote sensing of clouds and weather as a DoD civil servant for about 14 years, and then I spent 13 years at Boston University doing remote sensing of land and vegetation instead of clouds and weather. And so now we'll see if I can hang on that long at UMass Boston, and I've switched to doing remote sensing of coastal systems and biomass. As Jean Guo said, I'm on the satellite teams for MODIS, VIIRS, and Landsat. They're all imaging satellites that track what's going on Earth and look at climate change and such. And I'm also a new collaborator on a LiDAR mission that's going to go up on the space station. And so the kind of products I make, they're very pretty pictures. I do a lot of pretty pictures. And this is looking at global albedo over the globe. And so this is the amount of solar energy that's reflected back out to space at any moment. Nice bright Sahara, and then darker areas of the vegetation. And this is used by climate modelers and biogeochemical modelers to monitor what's going on Earth. So coming to UMass Boston, there are some research challenges here, and which we're working towards, but we've still got them here. So one of the major ones is the research computing support. We have the most amazing research director. Jeff Dusenberry is wonderful, but he's it, and there's too many of us. You've brought so many of us in that need high computing power. That's something we have to keep working on. For research grant management, of all the organizations I've worked for, undoubtedly the ORSP, the Office of Research and Sponsored Projects here, is the best one I have ever worked for. Shala, Matt, Ed, they've all supported me unfailingly. Just a week ago, Shala stayed up till 11:30 at night to get a grant of mine in before midnight. They're amazing. So we've got these challenges, but the offset to those challenges is the students. When I came here, Regini told me it was, without question, I would fall in love with the students. I have, without question, the most amazing students. So far, I've been lucky enough to have 6. One has already graduated, a couple postdocs. I do have a few that are finishing up at BU. I have 3 of my UMass Boston ones with me here today. And they come from all over. I inherited 2 of them that had funding changes or wanted to do something different and ended up in my group. I had 2 new post-bachelor students that joined my group directly from just applying. One of them was a UMB student himself, the one that won the NASA fellowship. And I had 2 postmaster students that have been referred to me by colleagues. And already all of these students are presenting at major conferences, and just over the last year and a half, these are all the conferences that they've been giving their first ever scientific presentations at. I had a choice when I came here. I had to move really quickly because I had ongoing projects I was shifting, and I have responsibilities to NASA and USGS and such to provide products. And so I could have hired a bunch of postdocs, but I actually didn't. I decided I was going to try to ramp up my research team, my students, really, really rapidly. And so I took some of my startup money and basically just started dragging them to meetings and conferences and basically saying, I need you guys to spin up really fast. And we were fortunate that one of the first things that happened was I'm a member of the Landsat 8 team, and Landsat launch was happening. And I gathered up all of us, even the BU ones, and we all schlepped out to California to watch launch. And so here's the whole crew of us all together. I'll have you know that the little baby Nancy was wearing a pink NASA sweatshirt. You don't get much cuter than that. And so this is what it looks like to attend a launch. It's an amazing experience. You can feel the rumble, you can feel the noise, and you're just begging for that thing to make it to space. You've put so much effort into it. And so here we are. Here's 2 of my graduate students waiting for the instrument to go up, and then it's going up. And I love this because I've got them. They're mine now. They've watched that satellite go up. They're going to make sure it keeps going, and it's going to be wonderful. So this is the kind of information we get from Landsat 8. It's just so pretty. Look at New England. It's gorgeous. And look at us hone in on UMass. And this is the kind of stuff where we can monitor what's going on. We can see what's changing after Sandy, after storms, with flooding, with urbanization. All this we can track from this 30-meter resolution satellite imagery. It's really a fun thing I get to do. The other fun thing I've done since I've come to UMass Boston is we started participating in collaboration with Rochester Institute of Technology in building some little LiDARs. I already work on a big, very powerful LiDAR over at BU, and I continue to be the co-I on that product. But we decided we needed a very rapid, fast, easily deployable, a compact biomass LiDAR as we call it, but we really call it the cute baby LiDAR. And we just came up with a more scientific name to stick in papers. And we are fortunate that here at UMass, We have an amazing engineer in the School for the Environment, Francesco Perri, who basically just looked at the prototype for this and said, sure, I'll build you one. And he's just built some amazing things. And we've already deployed it in a whole bunch of places. Right off the bat, we were supporting the NSF's National Ecological Observatory Network by deploying in a transect from the rangelands near Fresno up into the Sierras. And my whole team was on the ground providing validation. And I ask you, have you ever seen a cuter graduate student in your life? This is the kind of instrumentation, information we get out of the CBLs, the cute baby LiDARs, and so we can get this very detailed reconstruction of the forest. And so we can reconstruct habitats, we can calculate biomass for carbon monitoring, we can do all these sorts of wonderful things. And that's a picture of Eddie and Ian deploying the CBL here. Both of them, by the way, are currently on an Antarctic cruise with one of my colleagues who didn't have graduate students of his own, so he's kind of swiped mine for a few weeks. And, you know, how much fun is that? And then there's the rest of us all off trying to validate what a human being, what a forester would do when they're in the forest to validate what we get from LiDAR reconstruction. And we got to see if... So what we do is, this is really a rapid instrument. We can deploy it. It takes 33 seconds to scan, and we can run around a forest and take 29, 30 scans over a hectare, put them all together, and start reconstructing that forest. We have a 3D forest to play in. It's like playing computer games. We can zoom through it. We can figure out how animals utilize the different layers of the forest. We can figure out how much photosynthesizing green materials there. We can figure out how much timber's there, all those sorts of wonderful things. Soon after we deployed in the Sierras, only a couple of weeks, we headed off to an international scanning bake-off, really, where we dragged out some commercial instruments. Our little tiny CBL, that kind of scary black-looking thing is the big one from BU that I also work on in collaboration with folks at UMass Lowell. And a couple of other commercial instrumentation. And again, the team was on the road. Here we've got Ian, Eddie, and Angela, and our little cute baby LiDARs working in these spectacular eucalypt forests and helping the Australians who are also worried about things like fuel load, and as well as the usual questions about biomass and stuff. We also work here in our own UMass Boston field station out on Nantucket. We're very interested in trying to figure out where the dissolved organic carbon transitions out of salt marshes. What's this very important zone right where the salt marshes hit the water? That's not only where all the nutrients come out, but also the buffer zones, what happens when we have storms. And so we do some work out at the Nantucket field station and use our little scanner to try to get some more information about that water vegetation surface zone. Eddie's NASA fellowship actually has to do with tropical forest, and to be perfectly honest, we only wrote it because he's a Costa Rican American. And I never really wanted to do research in tropical parts of the world. It's too hot for me. But Eddie pulled off this grant, and so suddenly we're doing field work in Costa Rica. So we went down with the NASA team last March, deployed in mangroves and tropical forests in Costa Rica. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Needless to say, you don't see me in this picture because I am way too old and fat to scramble around in that kind of environment. Our two guys are there, and they said basically they were packing up the instrument and then putting it in a box and then throwing it a meter or two to the next person because it was too hard to like scramble through the understory of this mangrove forest. It was, again, a wonderful experience. And then the rest of the team went on to camp at Serena Biological Station in pristine tropical forest and look at these wonderful buttress trees that we can't see when we're looking from space. We have no idea there's that much biomass underneath. And so we have to come up with ways of altering space-based estimates of tropical biomass, and our little compact biomass LiDAR is helping us estimate that and produce fudge factors. These other pictures show a wonderful strangler fig situation where the fig goes around a huge tree, kind of expands, and then the inner tree has eroded away, so it's almost like a cathedral, a circle of wonderful fig. And we scanned it both inside and out, and we've been notified that now that's the only record of that fig tree. It actually went down this past season and collapsed and crumbled, so that's kind of fun. And you can see my graduate student Angela there kind of pretending she's a wood sprite and kind of coming out through the bottom. These are the kind of LiDAR information to do those 3D reconstructions we can pull off. The mangroves, you can see the buttresses of the tropical forest there on the left. This is a lot of fun to work with too, to be perfectly honest. And Francesco sat down and ginned us up a brand new one. The second generation is hot off the press. We've already deployed it in Harvard Forest. Ian and Francesco came out and taught a group of UMass Boston and BU students how to operate in Harvard Forest. We've presented this now at the Forest Sat conference. There's Eddie giving his first ever presentation there. Angela gave her first ever presentation there. And we've got a bunch of scanning scheduled for next year. Harvard, Nantucket, Plum Island, Florida Everglades. We've got a return to Costa Rica in January, thanks to support from a Healy grant for just enough money to get us there and back. And we'll return to Brisbane for a huge international biomass meeting in March, and then a Silva laser or another terrestrial, all kinds of LiDAR, one in France in the fall. So basically, it's been a wild ride. I'm having a ball. I just love these kids to pieces. It's so much fun to hang out with them, and we're having a wonderful time. And yes, there's some challenges to doing research here, but the students make it more than worth it. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Crystal. And this concludes our program. Thank you all for coming. Happy holidays.